name is Deirdre O'Gorman and I'm the Marketing Manager in TSSG. Welcome to our virtual tour of the data centre, which is located in WIT's West Campus, overlooking the beautiful Waterford Greenway. Today's webinar is hosted by TSSG and CONNECT, which is the Science Foundation Ireland's Research Centre for Future Networks and Communications, and is part of the South East Science Festival for Science Week. Before we begin, you will see a poll on the screen, which many of you have just filled in. This is just for us to gauge the level of understanding you all have of data centres. So as you join, if you can just please fill it in there. While you're doing that, I'll cover some housekeeping. So over the next 45 minutes or so, you will hear from Dr. Brendan Jennings, who is the Interim Director of CONNECT and a Senior Researcher in WIT and TSSG. You will also then hear from Jerry Horgan, who is the Infrastructure Manager in TSSG. He will guide you through the data centre he manages along with his team. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, Jerry has asked us to please don't be afraid to ask. If you just use the Q&A function, Brendan will moderate and discuss them with Jerry. There's no need to wait until the very end, although we will have Q&A at the end as well. And just a reminder, this session will be recorded and we will send it to you all next week. And I suppose the purpose of this webinar is just to give you all a better understanding of what a data centre is, what a supercomputer is, and really give you context on what they mean to you in your daily lives. For example, have you ever actually wondered where your photos are stored when you save them to your cloud from your phone, or how much of your data can a data centre actually store? And Jerry has some lovely examples in there from the likes of Justin Bieber, who he chose himself to include. I suppose data centres are a part of our daily lives without us even realising it, and many of us know very little about them. And I can just see the results of the poll there is, one second now, and I shall share them with you all. So there's a real, I suppose, a basic enough knowledge of data centres of everyone joining today, which is great because we've styled it in such a way that we really want you to go home today knowing a little bit more about them. And look, I hope you all enjoy the morning. So I'll now pass you over to Brendan, who will give you a quick overview of CONNECT and TSSG, and then introduce you to Jerry. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Great to see so many of you join us this morning. So as Deirdre said, I'm currently the Interim Director of CONNECT, which is the SFI Research Centre looking at communications networks. It's headquartered in Trinity College, Dublin, but has 10 universities across the country and about 300 researchers looking at everything to do with communications networks. So we look at all aspects of getting data from point A to point B. I guess most people's experience of communications networks is through our mobile phone, which has a wireless connection to the core of the network. CONNECT, we look at those wireless connections, but we also look at what's behind, the actual network behind the mobile network and indeed the internet. And the key components of that are the data centers, which are at the very heart of these networks. And they can be quite mysterious. Most people have not ever been inside a data center. So we're really lucky in TSSG to have a data center. This building here on the top right with the black brick is one of the TSSG buildings, and we have the data center down in the basement. It's used for research purposes by ourselves for our own research work, but also by scientists across the country. So I suppose when we have visitors to TSSG, when we're in there ourselves and when we're allowed to have people visit, one of the things that we often do is bring them for a tour around the data center to give them a view of what actually happens. So we thought that today we'd try and give you a virtual tour. Hopefully some of you will actually be able to visit us in person in the future, and we'll actually show you around. But for today, this virtual tour, what we'll have to do. So as well as having been lucky to have the data center, we're also exceptionally lucky to have Jerry Horgan, who is our infrastructure manager. Jerry was involved with the data center from its very conception almost 15 years ago, in terms of planning the building, planning the physical space, and over time finding the money to fill it up with computers, etc., etc. So Jerry knows the data center intimately. He knows everything about it. If you've got any questions, he is the man to ask them. So for the questions, if you want to use either the Q&A tool or the chat tool in Zoom, you can find them in the menu on the bottom. Pop your question in there, and I'll ask Jerry the questions. And please do it throughout the talk, and I'll politely interrupt Jerry with the questions, and we'll take some questions right at the end. So I'm really looking forward to it. And with that, I'll hand over to Jerry.
Thanks, Brendan. Very nice introduction. So as Brendan and Deirdre have both said, questions as soon as you have them, as soon as they enter your head, ask me. No silly questions. The more questions you ask me, the better of an understanding of the level of what I'm explaining to you. So this image here is probably what most people know the building to look like from the road or from the Greenway, or if you're lucky enough from the river. The data center is actually in the bottom part of that, in the gray section. So I joke that we're in the basement because from the car park it looks like we're in the basement, but we're not. We've actually got pretty nice, our offices are out the front, so we've got pretty nice views from there. I'm going to use this slide here a lot because this is kind of going to contextualize where you are and where you are in relation to the data center. And as we go back and forth between different sections of the data center, we'll keep coming back to this slide. There's a lot happening on it, and I'll explain all of it over time, so you can bear with me. So we're effectively going to go into the data center. We're going to go in through the main door, which is near that large screen there in the kind of middle right. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into an area there that is, there's a bit of free space between the 4th and the 5th row of green server cabinets. So those, you see these big tall towers, they're all server cabinets. And so we're going to go in there, have a bit of a look around there, and then we'll start moving on to other parts of the data center. The reason for this is the data center is quite modular, and I can explain more of that later because different functions go in different locations, and that makes it much more efficient. So this is kind of what it looks like as you come in through the door. It's a bunch of cabinets, a bunch of cooling units on the side, and lots of servers, lots of devices inside in these cabinets. They change over time, they vary, they modernize, they evolve, things like that. There is the guys working away very busily for you, just to kind of show you what it looks like in there on a typical enough a day. And lots of lights flashing and stuff like this. This is another side of the data center as well. So this is what's known as the high density row, and I'll explain this more later as well. This is where we have lots of cooling in between every server cabinet. The other thing you might notice is all the cabling up above. So a lot of cabling overhead between the cabinets. There's actually 96 cables per cabinet, and we have 26 cabinets in the data center. So that's about 2,500 cables go between the data center and the network room. And so we're kind of interested to figure out what scale you might think of cabling that we have, whether it be 1 kilometers, 10 kilometers, or 100 kilometers of cabling. To give you a bit of a hint, the room is about 30 meters long. Sorry there now. So that cabling there goes from what we would into the network room. The network room is where those black cabinets are, those black towers. So we've already around where those green towers are, and now we're going to go down into that area where the black towers are. And it's a slightly different looking room. It's a slightly different looking layout. So this is what it looks normally, or this is what it's meant to look like. So it's very neat, very tidy. Everything's kind of put away and it's nice and clean. But if you take the doors off, this is what it really looks like. So as I said, we could have 2,500 cables coming in from the server room into the network room within the data center, and then we have internal patching to do within the data center. So there could be another 2,500 patches to do in the data center, and there could be another 2,500 patches done in the network room versus the server room as well.
Jerry, first question in, what's the temperature in there? Is it cold? Is it warm?
No, it's reasonably warm actually. So in that room there, you're probably looking at about 20 degrees, 21 degrees. Most of the temperature is actually to suit ourselves. if I go to this slide for a second, you see two different areas. So the two rooms are cooled differently. So the network room is cooled with traditional air conditioning units. Keep that between 19 and 20 degrees. The units there are all kind of air cooled. And then on the right hand side in the server room, that is, it's all liquid, it's water cooled. So the cabinets are kind of closed and they have their own closed loop system, and you might be able to see some green, might be able to say some blue and red lines, which represent the water flow under the floor. So there we give the air temperature in at about 23 degrees, and usually comes out around between 30 and 40, depending on the compute power that's within a cabinet or within a cabinet area. So I'm just going to come back to here, and we might have the answers to that poll. And well, the majority is actually correct. There is not short of 100 kilometers of cabling between those two rooms.
And Jerry, a question in then, well, if you've got a lot of cables there, what if one of them gets damaged? How do you find it? How do you fix it?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. We don't fix it, we ignore it. We mark it as being damaged and that's it. So it's hard to see, but if you look on the left-hand side, you see a lot of cables going into a gray panel there. So that's known as a patch panel. So we have an intelligent patching system, and that monitors all the cables in the database. And so we can mark it in the database, this is damaged, do not use it, and we'll stop using it in the future. How do we find it? That's a harder question. So we have a network tester, and we can plug that in on both ends of the cable, and we can have a look at that. Usually what happens though is we start to see a performance issue on a server or on something running on a server. And as we start debugging that, we would work our way down through the network stack and through all the operating systems and everything else. And eventually you start seeing errors on interfaces and things like that. And once we start seeing errors, we know what it is. We can test the cables between the server and the patch panel. We can test the structure cabling, which is the cabling between the server room and the network room. And we can test the cable on the far end. So there's lots of testing we can do with lots of tools. And then if it's a patch cable, so a local cable, so to speak, we can replace that. But if it's part of the structure cabling, we mark it as broken and we avoid it.
And Jerry, if that one of the computers is isolated from the rest, and is that not a problem?
No, not really. Most of those, so as I said, top of each cabinet would have about 96. They have 96 copper cables going in. Actually, I don't have a good picture to show you some of the other cabinets. So they would have a lot of copper going in. There should be a bit of spare capacity in there, but most of the servers will be coming out with anything up to 4 or 5 cables each. In fact, the servers that we use for a cloud would have 7 network connections coming out each. And they would be a mix of 1 gigabit and 10 gigabit network connections. Some of the newer servers are looking at 40 gigabit connections, and if we at the supercomputer, they would be looking at multiples of 100 gigabit connections.
All right, and another question in from James. Do the networking cables interfere with each other like DSL does, or
no? They're all shielded, and they're actually tested before they leave the factory. So they are Cat6A cables, so they're capable of doing 10 gigabits. So they have an outer shield, and then each of the pairs are kind of wrapped together and wrapped around each other very, very tightly to cancel the noise. And there's 8 cores within a network cable. And each pair then, so there's 4 pairs inside that network cable. They're all wrapped very tightly around each other. They're isolated from each other. The cables are isolated from each other. And the manufacturer does a test called a 6+1. And so what that is, they put 1 cable in the middle and surround it with 6 other cables. And that's how they do their testing.
All right, very good. There's also a question around use of electricity. I think you're going to get later. And about who uses the data center. But another question about the cabling, how long does it take to trace a faulty cable and isolate it? It sounds like it's pretty quick, is it? Or?
No. So we had 6 people spend 2 days each trying to trace a cable one day. It usually takes about 5 minutes, to be honest. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. And this is because we had a lot of virtualization in place. So we had virtualized on the network. We had the network cable going to the server. On the server, then we had more virtualization. So we built the cloud platform on the server. And inside that cloud platform, the user of that built their own cloud platform. So we had 3 levels of network virtualization and another 3 levels of compute virtualization. And we had to debug the whole way from the top of the stack right down to the bottom. So eventually find that it was a dodgy patch cable that was worth a fiver. You know, so it took 6 very experienced people, 2 days apiece to get to the bottom of that.
All right, and then another question. Then, and I'm amazed that people are so interested in cables. Why so much copper instead of fiber? Why don't you? Why is it no fiber?
Copper is a lot cheaper. Is the very short answer. So Cat 6A copper will run at 10 gigabits, no problem. It will run up to about 100 meters. The ports are like I could buy a switch, we say, for about 15,000 with 48 10 gigabit copper ports. All I need then is a cable, which is quite cheap. If I could buy a 48 port fiber switch with 10 gigabit as well, but then I'd have to buy interfaces, and those interfaces can be a couple of €100 each. So it doubles, if not triples, the price.
Right. Okay. And then what about another question about how the data center is connected to the rest of the world? Does that happen inside this room here somewhere?
Yeah, you can't see it in that image. It actually happens on the right-hand side, and we have 2 10 gigabit internet, two 10 gigabit links to the internet. So they'll load balance, so they can be active, but they'll also fail over if there's ever an issue.
Right. And one last question around this area then, is there some way to shut down all connections rather than shutting down individual connections? Thinking about if you had a virus attack on the data center or...
Yeah, so we've it's quite a distributed network. So shutting down individual network, you won't necessarily shut down individual ports if it was quite widespread, because there's a lot of ports. Like we've just shy of 3,500 active ports in the data center. So it would depend on how many you need to shut down. What you would probably do is you would shut down switches. So it would depend on the size of it. Like if it was 20 ports, you'd go in and manually shut them all down. If it was 1,500 ports, you'd probably just start taking the hit and shutting down switches.
All right, very good. I'll let you go on, and I'll pepper you with some more questions a bit later.
Yeah, no problem. Sure. So so we've been in the network room, and I suppose I'm going to talk a bit about storage in data centers. So we have a lot of storage ourselves, and we use software-defined storage, and this is kind of in the lower, the green cabinets near the black cabinets is where that is. And so just to give a bit of context around storage and about size of data, really, your average MP3 is about 3 megabytes. So in a gigabyte, you can have about 300 of them. Oh, lovely, that didn't work out. In terabyte, you could have about 300,000 of them. And I am probably in the way of that bit of text there. Yeah, and so in a petabyte, you would have 300,000 MP3s, possibly. This is just to give some context of the scale and the size. And then if you had, you could also have an exabyte, which is, again, I can't see the full numbers there, but it's 1,000 petabytes. Now in our data center, we're starting to fill out the square in the bottom right corner. So we're starting to build out multiple petabytes of storage. That's where we're at. Why is that important? Well, just in context of Ireland and data centers, there's 54 data centers active in Ireland, and those are commercial data centers. There's lots of data centers in institutions and private data centers or research data centers like ours. There are 16 more data centers being built. Just to give a bit of context, by about 2028, nearly 30% of Ireland's total energy output will be consumed by data centers, which is very, very high. Across most of the rest of the world, it's expected to hit about 8%. So Ireland is a very good country for data centers, and it's a very good country for data centers because of the climate. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we have a water-cooled data center, and that is because it is it's quite a nice environment outside. It's never too hot, it's never too cold, and it allows us to cool the data center quite nicely. Our data center is actually quite small. It's about 300 kilowatts. The average data center that we're seeing being built is at least 80 gigawatts. So that's a gigawatt is 80 megawatts. So a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So it'd be at least 20 times the size of what we would have. That'll be your average being built, and some of them are being built a bit larger. The current estimate right now in 2020 for data centers is their power consumption is about 1 gigawatt, and that will be enough to power 330,000 average homes. Our data center will be about the equivalent of 1,300 average homes. And I'll give you a bit more of a, I'll give you a bit more of a breakdown of that. In the next few years, the data center industry in Ireland is expected to be worth about 10 billion, and about a fifth of that cost goes into construction. The rest then is in services and stuff like that. I'll explain, so Justin Bieber, he had this music video called Despacio, I think it's called. By the time that hit 5 billion streamed YouTube videos, which was in 2018, the energy consumption was the equivalent of powering 40,000 US homes for a year. It's now exceeded 6.5 billion, so that's another 20% on top of that or so. So 50,000, the power consumption required for 50,000 homes has been spent on his YouTube video. Make with that what you like. And even just to put that into context, the traffic out of Dublin per month right now is 100. So that's the internet traffic that's leaving data centers in Ireland going across the rest of the world. That's currently 132 exabytes per month. That's what's leaving the country. There's a massive amount of storage in this country. I'm just bringing you back here because I just wanted to talk about our cabinets here. So if you look at those green cabinets on in the kind of the mid right, so there's 4 in a row that are perpendicular to the other ones. That's our high density row. And each cabinet in there is about the equivalent of 100 normal homes, each cabinet. Or if you went home and turned on absolutely everything you had in your power and saturated your power link, so you turned on your electric shower or showers if you have more than one, you turned on your oven, you turned on your kettles, you put them onto a constant boil, you turned on your microwaves and every other bit of electronics in your house, and you went into 2 neighbours and got them to do the same, it'd be the equivalent of that. But nobody runs all their appliances all the time and consumes all their energy at one time. So it's actually about the equivalent. Just one cabinet is about the equivalent of 100 homes in that high density area. And that's important because that's where the supercomputer is. The supercomputer draws a lot of power. And this was the supercomputer being delivered.
Jerry, before you go on to talk about the supercomputer, a couple of questions. So first one, I suppose, is how much does that sounds like a lot of a big electricity bill. How much is it?
Well, it's the equivalent of a normal home every 2 days. So it's a little over 600 euros per day. We actually pay less for electricity than the average house would, is part of the thing as well. Because we consume so much, we get better rates. But yeah, we're paying about 600 euros a day.
Wow.
Every day, 7 days a week.
And a question there, are there any plans to maybe use solar energy or other renewable energy to...
Yeah, we're looking at it. We've been investigating a solar farm of about 300 kVA, so that would take a high percentage of our load. They would effectively take what's known as our base load. We've costed that out, and we're just trying to make the business case on that, but that'd be very nice. We actually have the space here on the campus to do it, which you've seen from the introduction, and it'd be a good thing for us to do.
And yeah, and that, I suppose that raised another question. Where did all the money come to buy all this stuff?
Well, it's a mixture. It's all from funding bodies, and it's all from the funding bodies that we would tap up. So the building and the initial kit out came from the Higher Education Authority back in 2007, 2008, and then to start stocking it out with equipment. So the supercomputer was funded through Science Foundation Ireland, along with a lot of our other test beds and servers and clouds. It was mainly Science Foundation Ireland. But Enterprise Ireland has funded stuff as well. Some of our EU projects has funded bits of it too. And we will take donations when they come to be honest.
All right. And one last question then about the energy and electricity. This is from Deirdre Moody. With a forecast of 30% of energy going to be used by DCs in Ireland by 2028, do you think emerging technologies like liquid cooling, immersion, or direct chip will take off in the near future? Absolutely.
Like we're liquid cooled to the cabinet, but not to the chip. We're actually hearing now about oil cooled, that you actually take the cabinet, you kick it over on its back, and it's like a bathtub, and you basically just dip your servers into it and do that. And there's a couple of different factors there. So like we're running at about 35 kilowatts per cabinet in the high density row, but we could buy equipment that would do 60 kilowatts, no problem. So it's this power density to footprint issue that we're always dealing with. And so if you go for something like oil cooled or liquid cooled to the chip, you can get much higher densities in a much smaller space. And that can actually provide a lot more efficiency because you can generate less waste heat. You can get there's a figure that I would use, it's your power utilization efficiency. And it's a ratio of total power used divided by the total power that went into the compute side of things. So it's really telling you how much cooling that you've done, how much power is going into your cooling. So our one averages about 1.35, give or take. It's actually lower in the winter and higher in the summer. And what that works out at is about 35% of the data center power is just for cooling the data center. That's what that works out at.
Yeah. No, I suppose that just shows that it's power and electricity is the main factor constraining you when you run a data center. It's not necessarily space or anything else.
It's power and then cooling that power. So like the likes of Google and Yahoo and Amazon, they would all be under 1.1. So 1.08 or something like that. 1.0 is the holy grail, 1.00, but nobody's there yet.
All right, thanks, Jerry. Do you want to talk about the supercomputer?
Yeah, sorry, sure. So this is the supercomputer arriving. It came on the back of a rather large truck in multiple containers. That's a few of them there. Each of those containers had what's known as 20 of what look like servers, but they're actually sleds. So each of those units that you see there is actually 4 servers inside of that. So that's 80 servers per pallet. And we had 300 odd servers delivered. Those servers would have between 32 and 64 cores each, and probably about 256 to 512 gigs of RAM each. Overall, you're looking at the equivalent of about 15,000 laptops, 15,000 modern high-spec laptops. That's the power of the supercomputer. And I just want to go back here just for a second, because I just want to show it. You should be able to see there that those green cabinets there, top 3 rows, so the 3 from the middle to the right, that are kind of circled with HPC, all of them together. So those 15, there's actually 15 cabinets there, all of those together, that's the supercomputer. So it's not one computer, it's not one device, it's rows and rows and rows of servers and switches and storage and other devices. And it kind of looks like this. You know, now this is taking a bit of artistic license, and we've just taken a picture in the dark just to show you all the lights, because that's what we see if we go in. And right there in the middle, you're looking at about 3 petabytes of storage, just there with all those lovely green lights. So that's what a supercomputer looks like. That's what it is. So we're back here again, and I suppose we've been talking about cooling a bit, and we have our chillers on the roof. That's them there. We've 2 chillers there. They're train chillers. They're 5 tons each, so there's 10 tons of chillers just on the roof. They keep the data center ticking over. And as we said, there's a lot of power goes into cooling that data center. And if there's ever a problem with the chillers or a problem with the power, we end up with issues like this, and with these graphs here. You know, unfortunately, some of these graphs aren't fully time synced together. They are more or less, but you can see on the top right-hand corner, we had an issue at around just after midnight. So on the top left, you can see that's the water flow, it's the liters per minute of cooling. You can see that drops off from 55 liters down to about 30, and then it starts to really drop off. And we're having issues with one of the chillers, and you can see on the top right-hand side, you can just see the power consumption. So that main incomer means power consumption. You can see that drops off well over 100 amps per phase straight away, and that's the chiller has stopped and we're running into problems. And in the bottom left, then you can see that the server in temperature, so this is the air going into the temperature, is increasing. So it started at about 24, 25 degrees, and we're suddenly up about 40. And you can see at about 2:30, you can see kind of lots of dips dropping back down. And that's because we shut down the supercomputer. So you can see that we've started taking more load off, and then we eventually shut it down. And so you can see here, the bottom right behind me, you can't really see the time sequence on that. But you're seeing here that the output temperatures were between 26 and 35 degrees. They've shot well up to 50 degrees. But because we turned everything off, then they've dropped back down. If we didn't turn everything off, though, do you think they might have gotten to? I think there was a poll just put up there now.
And Jerry, what would happen if it was uncontrolled and it just got as high as the temperature got really high?
By and large, the servers will turn themselves off. They'll go into a self-protection mode and they'll just shut down. And everything all of a sudden will shut down in the data center. And it's the weirdest thing ever. It's the weirdest noise. So Brendan said, I know that data center intimately. I do. I actually know how it sounds. I know the background sound. I can sit in my office, which is where I am now. I'm right beside it. And if something changes, I can actually hear it. It's the weirdest thing ever. But there's always noise out of it. There's always a hum out of it. And we were swapping supercomputers out there a couple of years ago. And by the time they turned the whole thing off, the room went silent. And we were in the room when it went silent. And we actually ran out of the room because we thought there was a problem. But that's what would happen. The room, everything would shut off, it would shut down, and the servers and everything that's in it would try and protect themselves because they can't. There's only so hot that they can run, and after that, then they just die. Components fail, everything else fails, and you're into very expensive builds to try and replace everything. So I see the results of the poll are in, and yeah, again, the majority is correct. It's well over 60 degrees is what gets there, and those cabinets are made of steel. So that steel goes to 60 degrees. So even opening the doors and interacting with the cabinets is very, very difficult at that point.
And Jerry, what would happen if there was a fire?
There's a fire suppression system in there. So there's it's called FM200. And what it does is it drops the oxygen levels in the room down. It brings it from about 16-20% down to about 12, give or take. So before that goes off, a bunch of alarms go off and you have a minute to get out of the room, which is pretty much plenty long enough. But if you don't, the oxygen levels will go low. All the doors and all the doors that we have. Let me see if I can get back and show you an image of the doors. Sorry there now. All those doors there, you can see that there's a door open there. All those doors will pop open on the front, and the gas will go in there, and it will extinguish the fire because there won't be enough oxygen. If you were still in the room, you will be alive, but you'll be unconscious because there's not enough oxygen to actually keep you conscious.
And that's always my favorite part of the real tour because I always hang by the door and so that I can be the first out in case it ever happens. So
yeah, that's pretty much the tour, but I'm quite happy to take any questions anybody has.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions, Jerry, that came through. One question about, who are the clients for the data center? Do people like Google use it, or who uses it?
No, it's not really a commercial data center. So some of the incubation clients in ARC Labs will use the data center because they're attached to us, but it's primarily for research. So 90+% of the activity in the data center is for research. It's all around research projects. It's around simulations. It's around modeling. Like you can see that we have GPU clusters for deep learning. We have our own cloud environment. So all the TSSG projects will be there. Some of our partner projects will be there from other universities. People in Connect users. We would have test beds hosted from this data center that lots of researchers will be using. And then if we have research projects with industry partners, a lot of the time it would end up running in there as well.
And the supercomputer, what's that used for? Is that any different to the rest of the cloud?
Yeah, it's more modeling and simulation. So it's, so a lot of it can be around, sometimes meta-air modeling was done on it quite a lot, and we would see the spikes because it ran 4 times a day. So your weather models, your weather charts would be running there. They could look at geophysical data. So you might do a big survey of the seabed or somewhere like that, and you'd bring all that data back and then you would run it through modeling. So if you ever see the films, trying to think of one right now, Interstellar, for example, you see this guy sitting on the floor of the data center running a bunch of numbers to calculate a trajectory for a spacecraft. That's the kind of stuff you do in there, but you would do chemical analysis, things like that as well. So when people are looking at vaccines for the likes of COVID or something, they will be running their data and their models through the supercomputer to see chemically how they interact with each other.
And just to reinforce that point, this is the national supercomputer that's used by scientists all across the country, and it is the main resource that's publicly funded for doing this kind of heavy computation for various kinds of science. One question around it is, well, if you were, instead of having a supercomputer, you were to use, say, regular computers or regular laptops, how many would you need to have the same computing power?
It's 15,000 is the from a compute power point of view, but that ignores completely storage. It ignores the management and the coordination effects and everything else as well. There's a lot of that there. So the networks. So again, if I was to just draw your attention, so those four cabinets that are in that high density row, so the road is perpendicular to all the other rows. Out of them, there's 1.56 terabits of networking connections out of each one of those. So that's 1,560 gigabits per cabinet in each of those. And that's kind of the level of interconnect. So whilst I say it's equivalent to about 15,000 laptops, it doesn't demonstrate the level of interconnectivity and management.
Right, okay. And in terms of flops, how many flops would the supercomputer have?
You finally got me. It's ranked about.
Yes.
You finally got me. It's ranked about 815th. The estimate was about 815th in the world when it was installed. So this is you're going to get me moaning now that this is the Irish government not funding research and science enough, and the supercomputer is now so small that it's not within the top 500. Whereas the first supercomputers that they would have funded would have made the top 100 originally.
Okay.
Even the previous one to this one, when it was installed, it was about 320th.
Yeah.
So lots of other governments and lots of other countries are investing in supercomputing and supercomputing power, but proportionally Ireland is not anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Duly noted, Jerry. How many people work looking after the data center?
There's 5 of us in total. I know that picture shows only 4, but we've hired again since. So if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see SDI, or infrastructure as code, and that's what we do. We automate everything. And you can see then going up on the left-hand side, you can see software-defined networking and software-defined storage. And this is, and the cloud. So it's all virtualized, it's all automated, and that allows us to manage everything. Like there's several hundred servers in there. There's hundreds and hundreds of physical items in there, and then there's thousands of virtual items in there.
Yeah, okay. And then a couple of questions then from Mohammed. Are there any physical or logical security measures at place? And if yes, how do you design them, and what factors are considered while designing security measures? And I always know that this is a sensitive question for anyone who runs a data center. So is there anything you can say?
I'll talk to him offline. I'll show him around. I'm pretty certain he's only upstairs. So I'm more than happy to answer that way.
Yeah, so I think you can take it as a yes, that there are security measures in place. Certainly the building is kind of a bit of a fortress, and you actually have to have permission to access it. So it is important. There's a lot of investment in there and a lot of sensitivity. So it's something we look after very carefully. Right, let me see if there's anything. Another very technical question. Do you use TOR or EOR architecture? So I guess EOR is top of rack. I can't remember what EOR is.
End of rack.
End of rack, right.
Yeah, no. So hence why we've all the cables coming out of the racks. So in some racks it would have made sense, and in other racks it wouldn't have, or end of row, sorry, is EOR. It wouldn't have made sense. We bring everything back to the network room, and to give a technical answer, we run a leaf spine architecture or a cloth architecture. So we have 2 spine switches, and then we have multiple leaf switches hanging off of that in pairs. Again, I can diagrams, not about at a later date, and that provides very efficient. So those switches, 240 gigabits each. And they would be 48 ports of 10 gigabit each, and all of that is non-blocking, so you can do the full capacity of every link in every direction, no problem. So there's quite a lot of capacity there, and the cabling allows us to maximize the capacity of the switches that we have.
All right, very good. Question then about what happens if the electricity goes? Do you have a generator?
We do. You can see it there on the top, very top right hand of the picture. That generator kicks in within about 3 seconds. Outside of that, then we have 2 UPSs. They're uninterruptible power supplies. They are backed with about 100 kilowatts of batteries. So that is 364 truck batteries, and they're up on the roof of the building. So that'll keep the whole place running for about 30 minutes, but we only need, generally speaking, 3 seconds for the generator to kick in.
And how long can the generator keep going, I guess, indefinitely?
Indefinitely to keep refilling it. 16 hours is our record, and that was during Ophelia. We had 12 hours previously in Darwin, but we had 16 hours in Ophelia before we had power back. So we never shut down, even these storms, one of the shuts down. We actually have a weather station on the roof, which somebody was fixing there, and you can barely see it there. You can just about see the animator on the top of it. That has recorded gusts of 147 kilometers an hour. So that's a class 1 hurricane.
Right, very good.
And we still continue to operate. So touching wood here, we started operating at the very end of 2010, and we've not shut down. And I'm doing my best not to jinx myself.
Very good. A question then around the supercomputer. Do you know what the kind of average usage of it is? You know, is it oversubscribed? Is there too much demand for it, or is it about right to what the country scientists need? It's
currently just about right, but it's not going to be replaced for a while. So the last supercomputer, when they replaced that, was oversubscribed at a ratio of 2 to 1. When this one started up, it was at about 50%. It's now pretty much at a 1 to 1 ratio. So if you put a job on it, you will get it to run straight away. What they expect before it goes to its expected end of life, which mightn't be its end of life, it'll be back again at 2 to 1.
Right, okay. Question then from Ryan. What specific hardware do you use? What requirements do the GPUs and CPUs have to run everything?
Okay, that varies. It's a mixed bag. So as I alluded to earlier, we kind of beg, steal and borrow sometimes to get equipment in there. So nearly everything is funded through funding calls from very generous, even though I've been giving out about them, funding agencies. But those funding calls can be random. So we would have servers in there that I would have bought in 2008, still doing functions. So we would have a mix of Sun servers in there. We would have a mix of HP servers in there, a lot of Dell servers, primarily Dell servers now. And the latest ones are from Penguin, and they're effectively Intel servers. So Intel basically made the servers themselves. So it's quite a mix, and it's the same with the network. The network is a mix of Cisco and Arista, but you'll find bits of Juniper and Pika 8 and a few other odds and ends in there as well. Because it's research, nothing is ever uniform. There's always a reason that we've picked up something in particular, and we will continue to work on that specific thing as well.
And are you willing or able to tell us how much all the equipment in there cost?
A little less than 10 million.
Right, for the works?
Yeah.
Not including the building?
And the building itself is another 1.5.
Right, okay.
The data center part of the building, which is, you can kind of see it just above my head in red in that mock-up of the building there.
Yeah, and obviously significant running costs in terms of staff time and electricity mostly. Yeah.
Yeah, electricity. Well, staff is the biggest cost, and then electricity.
Yeah, good stuff. And then another question: then, can you describe your daily work? How much time do you spend in the centre versus at the desk? And how do you find the job? Is it something that you find?
Yeah,
doing it for so long, is it becoming old, or is it still something that's stimulating?
It's fresh. It keeps changing. You know, it keeps evolving. Network management has changed dramatically in the last 20 years. You know, we've about 20 petabytes of backend switching capability. You know, so like when I started here, we had one switch that was able to do about a gigabit. You know, total capacity was a gigabit with a 1 megabit internet connection. Gone from 1 megabit to a gigabit to 2 by 10 gigabits. You know, so things are changing, things are evolving. As we grow, the technologies that we can work with have evolved and grown. We try and spend most of our time at the desk, if at all possible. One of my colleagues would describe humans in the data center like viruses. They shouldn't be in there because they only cause problems. So we do our level best to actually stay out of there. So we're in there for physical interactions only, and that's it. Everything else can be done remotely. So we can remotely install the servers. We can remotely fix and diagnose the servers. It's literally a physical job is all that brings us in there. Like with some of our automation systems, we can deploy a cloud from bare metal. So bare metal is I've got the server like you saw in that in those containers, in those wooden boxes. We've taken that, we've stuck it into the cabinet, we've given it power and given it a network connection. So between doing that and having the cloud fully operational takes us about 90 minutes.
Okay, maybe one last question then. Have you hooked up this data center to other research infrastructure around the country, worked with other universities, done things at a country level?
Yeah, I don't have diagrams here to show up, but like we had a lovely Pan Ireland ring, a private fiber ring at 10 gigabits. So connected ourselves, CIT, Trinity, and another data center in Dublin. We were able to run lots of experiments across that. So that was a dedicated dark fiber link. We're connecting back again with Trinity. They have another test bed that we're hoping to merge in with this one. We're running a Connect test bed called Pervasive Nation out of here as well. And as Brendan said, there's already 10 partners in Pervasive Nation. So lots of different universities, different institutes, all using this test bed. It's there for collaboration. It's open for collaboration.
Yep, very good. Yeah, no, I suppose I remember back when before the building was built back in 2005, 2006, I remember Jerry and some other people talking about the idea of building a data center. I have to admit at the time, I thought it was a bit crazy. I was going, well, what would you use it for? Who'd give you all the money to buy all the computers? But the guys did the Wayne's World thing, build it and they will come. And it's been a major success. I think it's a major asset for ourselves in WIT, but for the Connect Centre and even for the country as a whole. And I would just like to finish up by applauding Jerry and everyone who's been involved over the years. It's been a wonderful thing to have, and we'll get maximum use out of it in the years ahead. So listen, thank you everyone for joining. I hope that you learned a bit about data centers. They're certainly complex beasts, but they're kind of fascinating in their own way. So I think I'll maybe hand over to Deirdre to close the session. Deirdre, is there anything else you want to add at the end?
No, not at all. Just want to say thanks again for everyone for joining. I think it was really, really informative, Jerry. Thanks very much. And a great Q&A throughout, which made for a great conversation. So yeah, I think thanks everyone for joining. We'll send the recording to everyone early next week. And if anyone has any further questions, you can email info@tssg.org or contact us on social media. I think that's it.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody. Thanks for all the questions. It makes this really interactive. I love doing interactive tours, and this is the first virtual one I've done, and I was kind of wondering, am I going to be talking into the distance and getting no feedback? So it was really nice to have an interactive session. And if you ever get to here, so whenever you can, let me know and we'll bring you in and we'll give you a proper tour.
Also, just want to say thanks to Andrew O'Connell, who's hiding in the background there. It was his idea to do this tour, I think, initially. And he's the communications manager in Connect. So I just want to say thanks to Andrew too. Great, I think we'll leave you all go. Thank you.